the Cower thing, though, built by men with beards and hammers.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so, you know.
Gotta do something different.
Gotta do something different, yeah. That's his thing. It's his whole shtick. Hey, everybody, welcome to the Luthierist Podcast. I'm Paul Rhoney.
I'm Jason Rogers.
And I am Matt Smith.
Yeah, and we're here again, and we're second week into January already. NAMM's just around the corner. We had a whole plan for this episode that we're basically pushing back to next week. So, with that, we've got some questions to answer. How about that?
Yeah, I put out a call for some questions on Instagram and Facebook, and of course the last episode too, and we got a bunch of responses. I'm really happy about that.
Yeah, very cool.
Yeah.
And we've cobbled together a handful of them that kind of fits a theme. So if you don't hear your question this time, don't worry. It's not that we didn't think it was cool or anything. It's just we want to try to package some Q&A shows together, kind of that's cohesive and makes sense for construction process or whatever it is. So that's what we got for you today.
Yeah, and I think that's just sort of a general shift in the way that we're doing things, and going forward in the future is to kind of like put things into some sort of categories and subjects. That way, they're kind of a little better, easy reference for people. We can tag it, and we can put something in the title or whatever that says, "Hey,
right.
here's your episode about what would we call this?" I mean, this is kind of a neck construction 101 kind of a thing, a little bit. We've got a little bit of stuff just sort of about tooling and kind of getting started, and then also going into the design part of things to consider when you're whether you're doing kind of a traditional or non-traditional sort of a thing, but kind of all around that crucial element, the neck of the guitar. And a lot of this stuff kind of applies to the whole instrument, but again, just to kind of keep it all cohesive. And all the other great questions that we got, we will get to those. We're going to probably have another Q&A show here soon.
Yep.
Okay.
Yes, Jesus built my hot rod.
Yeah. Just it's one more
it's
fish.
A love affair. Just Jesus and my hot rod. Yeah, but no. So recording again. I like that. I like what you just said while we were off air there about the neck being sort of like, it's like the engine of the car, or it's like the engine of the vehicle, and whether it's a 4-in-line or a 6-cylinder, parallel twin, whatever the case may be, it's the thing that drives it. Like, I think that. But I like that though. I think a lot of builders have that philosophy of kind of looking at the neck as really like one of the major contributors to the tone, and I mean it's definitely the thing that contributes to the feel. Big time. I mean the shape of a body is obviously important too, but if you're not bonding with the neck of the guitar, you're probably not going to play it. So all those dimensions and everything are important.
Yeah, if it's not firing on all frets, it's not firing on all cylinders. So it's just not going to perform right, baby.
There you go. There you go. All right.
So what are these questions we got here? What are these questions we got here, Matt?
Let's see here. Okay, so we got a question from somebody. It's off of Facebook. And that's Ted Jackal. Hey, thanks a lot for sending this in. So here we go. I want to do a proper full build, but I'm afraid of neck construction / fresh slotting. So let's talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, and one of the cool things that's made all these questions kind of locked together here is also we've got our survey that's up there. It's in the podcast description, and one of the questions we ask on that survey is, what if you build guitars, what is your biggest challenge right now? And 50% of respondents, we were really very happy about this, 50% of respondents said neck construction, and 33% said fretwork. So it's just like, ding, ding, ding.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think we're talking about necks tonight, fellas.
Yeah. It's the neck, that geometry, that center line. When you're laying out, you're drawing a guitar full scale. on a piece of paper. You got a big old long piece of construction paper. You slap down a center line, and the first thing you do is you choose your scale length. You choose how many strings you're doing, and that becomes the core, the backbone of the entire project. And that playability of the neck, the resulting playability, it's Rick Turner, he calls it the difference between a guitar and a GLO, GLO, guitar-like object, because if his neck doesn't work, I mean, it's just you're up a creek, and maybe the guitar becomes the paddle. I don't know.
Yeah, I think that's true, though. I mean, you can certainly carve, a ginormous baseball bat of a neck, and some people like that. That might be, a feel that certain people are into, and it might make it stable. But, what if you've got a guy that wants one of your guitars and he wants it ultra thin, and you've got to be able to make that ultra thin neck and still make it sturdy. So, yeah, all the geometry, the scale length, and Jason, you put a list here, and we're gonna get through this whole list here, but I'm gonna kind of just name off a bunch of stuff here. So you've got all these things that you're considering, right? One piece versus scarf stacked or laminated, an angled headstock versus a flat headstock, carbon fiber reinforcement, flexible neck versus rigid neck, single action versus double action truss rod, headstock truss rod axis versus the heel axis, tight versus flat, radius, strap versus. This list goes on. So there's all these things that you're taking into consideration, right? And so this is kind of like your design part of the thing, is like, what is the neck that you want to build, right?
Right. And you've got to, if you're basing it off of, an existing model or something like that, generally the fender necks are the flat, kind of one piece, or laminated by left and right laminated, maybe two pieces put together, and then that angled or that flat headstock on that, and then the Gibson is more of the one piece with the angled headstock. So it's like where are you starting from in the first place, and then when it comes to something like carbon fiber, that's kind of more of a modern consideration. But then, truss rod, the action that you want there, single versus double, that really that goes down to the deep core of the construction of the neck, and you want to have all this stuff really figured out before you start slabbing out wood or anything like that, because you gotta know what you're aiming for in the first place.
Yeah, well, and I think that the important thing to remember there is depending on the type of neck that you want to build is going to determine the types of jigs and some of the tools that you're going to need. So, if you only have one specific type that you want to do, you only really need to gear up for that type. If you decide you want to build every different type of thing, you're going to need a lot more to work with. You're going to need a lot more tools. You're going to need a lot more templates, jigs, space in your shop, all of these things that you're going to have to take into consideration. And there's a lot of different ways to do it. Are you going to hammer your frets, or are you going to press in your frets? Is one of those better than the other? And the thing is it's different for different people. There's great guitar makers that hammer them in. I prefer to press them in. I mean, and the result is the same. The end result is, you get the same thing, but it's what you're comfortable with. Again, how much space you have in your shop, if you're going to invest in all of those tools and all of those jigs and all of the things, or try to keep it simple, So I think that really just determining, what you want to build first is important. And then, like Perry Ormsby says, there's no rush. So start with one thing. Pick one thing that you want to start with and say, okay, this is, I'm going to build a Fender style neck first before I build a Gibson style neck. And just do that. Focus on that. Don't try to build them in tandem and build them both at the same time. You've got time to figure out all this stuff.
Right.
So go ahead and just get the process started, because really that fear of building a neck, that initial hump of like, I don't know if I can do this. It just seems so daunting and complicated. You're just never going to get over it unless you do it.
Yeah. And that was, for me, thinking back to the first neck I built, when it came to the actual putting the wood together, gluing the wood together, making sure this is plane straight, making sure this is at this angle. All of that was just fairly, simple woodworking. I had to come up with some clamping jigs and stuff like that to make sure that the fretboard was glued on and clamped onto the neck shaft in a really straight and very secure way. But the biggest hang up I was really worried about was, okay, now comes that day when I've got to take, this spoke shave or this file or this rasp, and I've got to start cutting into that piece of wood. And the first thing that you freak out about is like, okay, where's the truss rod? Am I going to hit it?
Are you going to carve right into the truss rod? Yeah, of course.
But you've got so much time. You're surprised by the time that you're done with it. You're surprised how much wood you took off, and you're still not anywhere close to the shape that you were hoping to get.
Yeah, or for that matter, that you are still, you still have plenty of meat behind your truss rod. Like you're okay. These truss rods are generally pretty low profile. The StewMac Hotrod was one that's it's a fairly tall rod. It's a fairly deep slot that is required for those things. You can't carve quite as deep of a neck with those. But most other truss rods, you can either, if it's single action and you're going in the curve channel, you can design that channel to where it only goes to a certain depth, but you have measurements, or if it's just the double action and if it's the shallow style, that's the point, is you have measurements. And this is why you plan first. This is why you draw it out full scale. This is why you come up with all of your geometry. You determine what you're making before you actually start making it. Is then you've got your measurements. And then one of those handy dandy tools that you have to have in your shop is calipers. And you can just measure it as you're carving it and say, okay, I've still got 1/4 of an inch left before I'm going to hit my truss rod. I think I'm probably good to go ahead and keep sanding this thing. You know? Or if I've only got 1/16 of an inch left before I hit my truss rod, guess I'd better stop. So, just have your tools and know what you're building. I mean, I think the first guitar neck I ever made, it was a guitar neck and it was fully functioning, and I made some very poor choices on the geometry of the thing. You know what I mean? It was a very uncomfortable neck to play, but it worked. You know what I mean? And it was the first guitar neck I made, and it worked. I made a guitar neck, but and I didn't hit the truss rod and everything just because I knew my depths. I was able to take measurements as I went.
And you can always go back. I guess, depending on what kind of finish you put on the neck, but even still, it doesn't really matter. If you get a neck put on the guitar and you get it strung up and you play it for a while and you go, you know what, this feels like I need to remove some right here or right there. You can just take it off, go back and like if you want to, if you want to sand it, if you want to file it, if you want to scrape it, you've got the space, if you've got the wood left over. I found that that my first 2 necks, that I was leaving too much on the shoulders. So the area directly below behind the fretboard,
not
the
down
fretboard
the center,
joint
sort
there.
of to the
sort of the shoulders in that.
Left and right of the center.
Yeah, it was just squarish. This is the best way to describe it. And I noticed that. Some other people played it, noticed it, and on the first neck, I did go back and knock it down, and the second neck too. And I went back in feeling completely comfortable that I could remove a bunch of material and that I'd still be safe. And got it finished back up, got it strung back up, and like, hell yeah, this works better now. This is awesome.
Well, another question here from Instagram, Irvin Smith asks, what is the most tedious part of a build? And I think that we were going to try to tie all of that together. And the most tedious part of a build is, honestly, for me, it's probably just sanding. I mean, there's always way too much sanding to do. Sanding all day long. But when it comes to the neck and neck construction specifically, would you say that if you're hand carving, just rough carving that initial profile is the most tedious part, or do you like that part?
It's that part is almost the release, because when the way that I carve a neck is I carve the throat around the headstock, and at the heel, just to get those, all those transitions, important transitions. And then I've got a spoke shave, and it's just a simple Stanley spoke shave, and you can just peel wood off like there's like there's no tomorrow, and it feels good to remove all that material. Just go and go and go, and then and then when I just use some really simple templates. It's just like cardstock, and I've got a shape on one end of, I think it's right around the 1st fret, and a shape on the other side of the card that's somewhere around the 12th to 15th fret. And I'm just checking it, and I'm just moving that template all over the place. And I usually find out it's just like, yep, take more off the shoulders. Yep, take more off the shoulders. And when I start getting within, with just a couple, maybe a 16th of an inch or so of what I would say is the finished shape, then I get out some files and I kind of fair out all those facets, and then I go in with the sandpaper 150 on a block and I smooth it all out. So that part is almost like the fun part. I found that's the part I thought was going to be the scariest. That's the funnest part now. The tedious part,
like the glow thing with the guitar-like object thing again, because you're like, it was square before, now it's round.
Right,
and,
right. Yeah. But the tedious part for me is all the construction of the neck, the lamination, the reflattening of the surface that's going to mate with the fretboard. Getting the fretboard radiused and getting that finished, slotting it. Just like there's so many little tedious steps, but like carving it, that's just like woohoo! You can finally just like let it loose on this thing, and it's almost a real neck. And you can pick it up, you can hold it in your hand, and you can fret a power chord, and you're like.
Okay, so that's a lot of sort of umbrella overview information about neck construction and some of the things to take into consideration. Just to sort of like sum of that up and put a little emphasis, a few little like sort of bullet points on things, would just be to say to, sort of know what you're building first, have your plan, have all your measurements, have all your scale drawings, know all that stuff, and then take measurements as you go, make sure that things are coming out to spec, because, even if you're machining something on a CNC, you're still going to do the same thing of like, put the blank down, tell the machine to go in and carve it, and then take it off and measure it to make sure that you're on spec. And make adjustments in your program or in your execution of the program if necessary, just to make sure you're on spec. But measure things out as you go. Right. You just want to make sure that that fretboard to neck shaft gluing seam. Is that, why am I like blanking?
Yeah, joint, surface.
Joint.
Yeah,
that's a better word. Just want to make sure that that's flat.
Yeah.
I think that's going to be one of your most critical pieces of the puzzle there. Just make sure that that's flat. Make sure that your fretboard radius, whatever style you're doing, make sure that that's nice and straight and flat. Or if you're sanding relief into the fretboard like some guys do, make sure, just take your measurements. Get on there and use your chipboard templates if you got them, or whatever it is that you need to do. But after you've done all that, and you've got your frets in, and by the way, for cutting fret slots, there's so many great ways to do it. Great jigs that you can get, whether it's like the table saw sliding thing, or just the little miter box thing from Stumac or whatever. Any of those things, when you've got one of those templates, they can work really, really good. Right. I've even seen a multi-scale one for the table saw with it's like this crazy shifting thing.
I've seen that too.
Have you seen that?
Yeah, I've seen that.
Yeah, it's incredible. Oh, man, it's so smart. It's just like, oh man, multi-scale on a table saw. It's beautiful. Right. So, but any one of those template situations, you're going to be able to get your fret slots laid out nice and accurate, and then it's just a matter of driving the frets in there, and
there's also when it comes to cutting the slots, it really, there's a lot of nervousness about being accurate, but you can do it with, you've got to have the right saw. You have to have
thin curve, right?
A back saw, a gents saw, or something like that, or one of those Dozuki Japanese style saws. Just it's got to have the right curve.
Yeah.
But if you've got a steady hand, and if you can score the marks on your fretboard, it's really not that hard to start a cut and to just really gently, very straight pulls. Get a nice clean slot. You've got time to think about it. You can even set up like temporary sort of miter guide kind of thing with just like a piece of wood clamped onto the fretboard, and that the saw just rests up against it to make sure it's a good 90-degree angle off the surface of the fretboard. You have time. You have time to think about this stuff, and it might take you half an hour to cut all the slots just doing it freehand. But you know what? It's doable. It's totally doable.
Yeah, absolutely. Then once you've got all the frets in, of course, it's 33% of our survey respondents said fretwork, just leveling, crowning, polishing. Fretwork, yeah. I mean, it's a bear. It's definitely. I talked to Sully recently, and he was talking about NAMM and all the guitars that he's bringing to NAMM, and he's starting. Let's just say he potentially has a lot of fretwork he's got to do in a very short amount of time, and he's just like, man, I wish I had a Plek machine. You know what I mean? So it's very much, fretwork is daunting. It's a big deal. I think this is actually going to tie into the next question a little bit too, because. Well, Matt, go ahead and read the next, our next question there.
All right, so this is from Facebook. Joe Minter asks, from experienced builders advising a novice, what workshop and or bench skills are essential to building guitars?
Yeah, so the reason this ties in my mind is because my basic response to this is kind of in a way, not so much to think about the tools that you do need, because there is a ton of, you're going to want a bandsaw and a drill press and routers, and there's all these things, you know what I mean? There's like this huge list. Everybody's looking at the Grizzly catalog, and everybody's looking at the StewMac catalog, and they're just thinking, well, yeah, ideally I would just have all of these things, right?
A 900 square foot shop.
Yeah, and that's the thing too, is like how much space do you have, and also like how handy are you with, I don't need to buy that tool because I can repurpose this other thing, and I can make a jig, and I can come up with an improvised way of doing the same process. I had one of those Wagner safety planers. I still have it. Those things are really cool. But
so much mileage out of that. Yeah.
Yeah. You know what I mean? It was like, well, I don't have a planer, but I've got a Wagner safety planer, and I can flatten stuff with that. So that was what I used for years, And so there's ways that you can improvise all of these things. So I kind of think that in a way, it's a matter more of like asking yourself what you don't need, because when you look at the StewMac catalog and the Grizzly catalog and all these other things, there's so much stuff to choose from. StewMac's got like 5 different styles of fret crowning file.
Yeah,
it's insane. You know what I mean? And you're like, possibly more, yeah. And you're like, well, okay. So there's like small, medium, and large for different sizes of fretwork, and you're like, okay, that makes sense. But you're like, I don't know if I want the traditional, steel file cutting style kind, or if I want the diamond grit style, but they've got the new Z file thing, and it's like, which one am I gonna get? You know what I mean? And you don't need all of them. It's just daunting to think that you would need all those tools, and the truth is that you don't. So I think that that's kind of maybe the thing to ask yourselves is when you start your project, say you start building your neck, say, okay, I'm gonna build this neck now. How do I start? Like, okay, I bought a piece of wood. It's a Fender style neck. It's too thick. How do I make this thick piece of wood thinner now? And there's multiple ways to do that. The safety planer, a regular planer, the drum sander. You could just resaw it on a bandsaw. You can, there's different ways to do it. So how are you going to handle it? And so, what's within your budget? What can you just go over to a friend's garage and run it through their machine? There's a lot of different ways to handle it. So just take each problem as they come, you know. That would be probably how I would approach it. And when you need to buy a tool, you know, you can do your research to decide which one is the one that's for you. You know, with fretwork, to go back to that, when you get to that point in the process, there's lots of flat things that you can get that can level frets, right? Sharpies are cheap. You can get those anywhere. So get yourself a Sharpie the top of your frets. You can get a lot of guys, depending on your process, you may want to straighten the neck out, make sure that it's dead flat before you start your fretwork, or you start the leveling process. So you're going to need some kind of a straight edge for that. I really like the notched one from StuMac. I think those things are pretty cool.
Yeah, they are cool.
Worth the extra money versus a regular straight edge. That's up to you to decide, you know, but I think probably worth the extra money. Those things are very good. As far as something flat is concerned, glass is generally pretty flat. You can probably get an offcut from your local glass shop for cheap or free. And then your sticky back sandpaper, or there's other things that you can use, but you know, do your research, and there's lots of like YouTube videos out there to show that stuff, and that's really kind of one of the things that we're going to be getting into with our YouTube series, you know, down the road, is just doing stuff like that, you know, showing you the difference between what works better between a piece of glass versus those you know, diamond honing stones.
Right. And you know, when you're talking about do what works for you and do what's affordable, there's a lot of stuff that I did early on in my building that was completely based on just thrift, because I didn't have a whole lot of money to put into this the hobby at the time, and I found that even when I purchased some tools, I didn't necessarily like them. Like, so for example, when it comes to fret crowning, I have one of those StuMac, just those orange handled ones, where those just those regular files, right? Crowning files. And I did a couple necks like that, and I'm like, what is wrong? Why is this? I didn't like the finish. There's like these little ridges, these little chatter marks. And so what I did was I found that I had this little small triangular file that I had bought at a secondhand store for like $1, and I put a new little handle on it so it's comfortable in my palm. And I went to my grinder and I ground off one of the corners, and I smoothed that out. So now it's what's known as a safety edge file, right? And that works. It works so well for me. And I just go onto I Sharpie the top, and I just go from the side, and I go on. You know, I start on the left side of the neck, you know, on the player side, and I round over till I've got just a tiny little peak of black, and then I flip the neck around so I'm on the downhill side, and I round over until I've got this thin little line of black, and then I actually go back with a polishing tool that I made myself. It's a piece of dowel, and I just got a notch in there, and I use like 400 to 600 grit sandpaper, and it just conforms right over the top, and just zip, and it polishes all those scratches right out. And so here I've spent a total of, you know, maybe $3 on, you know, yeah. So you don't have to go, you know, some of the Luthiery supply companies have tools that can make things very, very easy and very accurate, but there's a lot of stuff that you can just repurpose and use on your own. Just maybe even something that you already have out of the toolbox, and just maybe with a little modification or something like that, and it'll work fine.
Yeah, I've found the coolest things at garage sales. I mean, if you go to the Goodwill, there's always some sort of tool that you can repurpose or utilize, you know, for very cheap. So,
yeah, and I mean, you know, early in my days, I needed a fret crowning file of some kind, something to do that job, and I just thought, man, you know what? I'm going to do my research, and I'm going to try to get the best thing that you can get, whatever the cost was, you know. And what I ended up getting was the StuMac ones that's like the little handle with the curved bit, you know. It's the Gurian style, I think, where it's angled or whatever, and it's the diamond one. So you pull the bit out and you turn it around the other way, and you have two different grits, you know. And I got all three. I got the jumbo, the medium, and the small. You know what I mean? And used the medium so much that I had to buy a new one. The other ones I still have are pretty sharp because I don't really do a lot of small or jumbo frets. But that just ended up being the tool that I bought for that job. And it's been great, and it's still probably my favorite for that job. But now, over the years, as I've had more experience, I've used other files, other types, and found that I can get, just as good an end result from that type. And it just comes down to a matter of like practice, and just using the tool over and over and over again, and figuring out how best to make it work. And my method with fretwork, I've actually done it both ways, where when you're crowning it, you crown it and you leave a tiny little line down the middle, and then basically go on to your polishing. Or if you're doing the end, probably do the end round over thing first, but do that and then the crown or the polishing. But I've also done it where I would take out the line completely, and then basically start the polishing process, sort of like go up to a certain grit with it, and then I'd have a block, another like my flat block again,
right?
This time with a really really fine sandpaper on it, and then Sharpie the frets again and go over them again to kind of almost burnish the top of it. It's kind of like a sanity check of making sure that I didn't crown too much.
Yeah, right.
And doing that, I can get a skinnier line down the middle. You know what I mean? It's just like this micro line that goes right down the middle, So I've done it both ways. I think either way, as far as technique is concerned, if you're just make sure that your abrasive, whatever kind of abrasive you're using, make sure that it's very firmly secured, I guess, to your flat block, whatever your flat block may be. Because if you're just holding sandpaper over a block, it can kind of ripple as you're moving it along, and then you can end up with low spots. So if you need to get some, if you're leveling with like 400 grit on a piece of glass, you can just buy 400 grit sandpaper that's already sticky back. But I don't know any place that sells 2000 grit sandpaper that's sticky back. So for getting that like on the glass or on the block, whatever, you'd have to use like a spray adhesive or something to get it to stick down. You know what I mean? So you really want to get that fully, flat and on there. But then you can do that, and then then you do that sort of extra last level of like sanity check, make sure that you're still flat, and then you can do your final polish. Which I like to do on the wheel. I like to do with like the some kind of a buffing cotton buffer, high speed with the polishing stick compounds.
That's cool. I'm gonna try that.
Yeah, I mean it's just just different ways to do it. I've done it both ways, and I've gotten great results both ways. So like I don't, what I mean. That's really a choose your own adventure situation. But there's lots of instructional videos out there on YouTube about how to do fretwork. We're going to make our own. We're going to explore all the different ways that you can do it, talk about them, pros and cons. We're going to show you how all the tools work, and we'll get to that. But for now, I hope that kind of answers that question for everybody.
So let's pull this back out to the full shop. That was the question Joel Minter asked there, and because when you're thinking about doing this as a hobby or as a small business or anything like that, it can be kind of daunting thinking about the full picture, just from one end to the other. And one of the things I think that we talked about with Joe Parker was that idea of if you're talking about a factory setting, you're talking about a lot of individuals that are really good at one job. And here, as a small time builder, as a hobbyist, you have to be good at all those jobs, and you have to have the tools for all of those jobs. So it's important that you really consider what tools you need and what tools you don't need. If some of you listened to my interview back this last summer, at the end, Paul asked me if I had advice for aspiring builders, and one of the pieces I gave was to actually write out step by step in an outline form and a narrative form the entire build process, and it could be shorthand, it could be long, it could be a couple pages, it could be a dozen pages, but really take the time to do that. Document everything. Like Paul was saying before, if you have this piece of wood that's thick and you need to make it thin, you need to know how you're doing that, because if you don't, you're stuck. You're just like you spend an hour or more sitting out in the shop with standing back with your arms folded, going, how am I going to do this? Don't ask me how I know that. But like really think about every blade, every bit, every dimension that you need to be able to create, because once it's time to start making sawdust, you're going to actually do this. So it's going to be a lot better to figure it out before you ruin expensive woods or expensive tools or your body parts in the process.
Yeah. Safety first, always, of course.
Yeah, safety first. The really interesting thing, if you've studied guitar building, and when I mean studied, I mean with kind of air quotes, because that's what I did for many years. Whether it's on books, and the books that I built, books that I started with that talk about building, I started with Benedetto's book, Archtop Building. I went on to Cumpiano and Nadelson. I got Melvin Hiscock. Each of those has amazing information. A lot of that is overlapping processes and tools. Some of them a lot more simple. Some of them, recommend a lot more expensive tools. But just like get an idea of what's possible. Check out all the stuff that's out there on the forums, like decades of forum conversations. I know I spent a lot of time on the MIMF, the Musical Instrument Makers Forum. Yeah. I still check it on a daily basis. Because it's just there are smart people on there that have way more experience than I do. Decades. It's amazing some of those people who give their time on there, dropping in, and giving some nuggets. But really, what you're going to find is that most steps of the build process are negotiable. They really are, and a lot of it has to do with the skills that you have, the skills that you want to develop, the tools that you have, and the tools that you want to acquire, and maybe just kind of the bottom line of how much you want to spend on the whole thing. But if you're thinking about the most simple instrument set or tool set for building instruments, consider pre-industrial instrument builders. I mean, you can probably break it down to a collection of hand saws, hand planes, chisels, some knives, and some other, specialty forms and fixtures. These people were Stradivari, Torres. I mean, we're talking about instruments that were built with basic tools of the carpenter. And some of those guys were trained as carpenters in the guild systems and stuff. You're talking about this, like the simplest, quietest shop that you could ever find. You might be able to break it down to just one simple, maybe 2x4 foot bench or something like that. And there's a certain romanticism in that notion of building an instrument without power tools. Of course, on the other end of the spectrum is like the full CNC, the full automated shop, where everything is, the instruments rendered virtually in CAD, and it's made into
one end, and it spits out a guitar on the other side. Yeah, that's
how of course. But it's it's like I'm oversimplifying that vastly, but those people who want to build that way, there is a certain satisfaction in the efficiency and accuracy and repeatability of this sort of work. But it's the learning curve with that technology is no less steep than the learning curve of that pre-industrial instrument builder.
Sure.
And using those chisels and using those hand planes, oh my God, like just a hand plane to be able to tune it up, to be able to cut the way that you want.
Oh, tool sharpening. That's a whole
geez.
Yeah.
So I think most most guitar builders today, most one-person shops, most hobbyists, there's somewhere on that spectrum from super simple to super high tech, and you just got to figure out what you want to develop, what you can afford, what you want to use now, what you want to gradually add to your repertoire and your shop space. My list of basic tools would probably be drill press. That was the first thing I bought and got a lot of mileage out of that. Using the safety planer and stuff. Definitely a bandsaw. That was my second big purchase. You can do a lot of stuff with the bandsaw that you might need to clean up some stuff that it would be a lot straighter and a lot cleaner on a table saw, but you can get by doing it on the bandsaw. Router is really handy, especially if you're doing electric guitars to very accurately plow out neck pockets and pick up routes. Having some hand planes is and knowing how to use them, even if you're talking just about like a simple Stanley low angle block plane, those can be really handy in cleaning up some surfaces. Having a handful of chisels, having a handful of files with different sort of aggressiveness of bite, whether they're mill files bastard or an actual rasp. I really like a spoke shave. Having some simple pull saws, just like some of those cheap Japanese style thin curve ones are really cool. And then as you go along, you're going to find that you're going to need to build some jigs and fixtures and templates. Electric guitars, a lot of templates. You don't have to, but it's really helpful for accuracy and repeatability. The fixtures for holding an instrument while you're carving something or gluing something up, that's really important. But that initial my suggestion, that initial outline, that drawing out exactly what it's going to be, you'll find out exactly what you need, and you'll find that maybe I can get by without a bandsaw right now. Maybe I just got like a little jigsaw or something, and I can clean it up with some sandpaper. Maybe I've got an oscillating spindle sander that can work really well to get into those curves of the waist and things like that. There's so many processes that can overlap with different tools, and just a matter of finding out what works best for you, what you're most comfortable with, and what you have on hand. Maybe what your friend has. You can go for that shop. That's a great way of doing it. Geez.
Yeah, there's no one right or wrong way, and it's going to vary for everybody. So, we're definitely always happy to give you everything that we know about the subject here. But, there's other ways to do it, and go back and listen to other episodes, and you're going to hear lots of other opinions on how different people do things.
For sure.
You made a few points in there that I kind of want to add a little emphasis to. One of them is just buy a book. Like, man, go out and get a book. Like, pick one, and anyone. Go to the StuMac catalog and just close your eyes and touch the page and buy a book. Like, or go talk to one of your favorite guitar makers and say, hey, like, I'm gonna buy a book. Like, what book should I buy? And see if they have a recommendation for you. Like, I have a stack of guitar building books on my bookshelf, and they're like some of my most cherished objects. And I remember which one was my first, and the way that you build a guitar in that book is really still largely, essentially the same way. Like I've got to a point in my career where I'm, doing a lot of 3D modeling, doing a lot of CNC stuff or whatever, but it's still, templates, router templates, and just, fitting things and assembling it all in the same way as that very, very first book. The neck carving thing in that book was something that was like mind-blowing to me at the time when I read it, and then every other book that I've ever read had a completely different way of doing it. And the way I do it now is kind of a hybrid of all of the different books that I've read, but it still had information in that book that was not in the other books. And just go buy a book, get one. You're going to just love flipping through those pages and just looking at those pictures, just get a book. You'll be thankful that you did.
Yeah.
And another thing that, well, this isn't really a point that you made, but this is something that I thought of while you were talking, and this has kind of been a philosophy of mine for a while now. It's really kind of almost more of like a challenge than it is anything else. Like, challenge yourself to do this. Which is to focus on getting good at just one thing at a time.
Yeah.
And what I mean by that is, as you're going through this process, you're going to find that there's certain things that you maybe just have a knack for. Maybe you're frightened of a router the first time you use it, and then you go, oh, you know what, that wasn't so bad, I can do that again. And then you go and you do it again, and you realize, like, hey, not only was that not hard for me, but also these routes look really clean. Like, this is all really, really good stuff. Like, I think I got this router thing down. And so you're feeling confident, and then you go down the line and you do your fretting, and you're thinking like, well, I think that looks pretty good. And then you go to level the frets and you realize, oh boy, my frets are super cattywampus. This is not good. And you're like, okay, so that was something you should have focused on. And so maybe that's going to be your new focus, because you've already got good at the routing. Now you need to focus on your fretting. I know for me, in my situation, I was kind of almost immediately good at fretting. Like, that was just something that was never really a challenge for me. Like, getting the frets seated was a bit more of a challenge, but I sort of, once I got that kind of figured out, it was like, okay, the frets are seated nicely now with the level polished crown and all that stuff. That was all something that was just like, okay, this is something that I just seem to naturally have a knack for. Cutting the nut took me way longer to figure out.
Oh my God.
The first couple of nuts that I cut were probably, they're just bad. You know what I mean? Like, and then it took me so long to figure, and it's like, it's not necessarily more or less accurate or delicate of work. It's and you want to get good at all of these things, but you've got to focus. I think that if you're trying to do everything and you're trying to spend every day doing the entire guitar, sometimes you need to just be that guy in the factory that does the one job over and over and over again until you get it right. And I know that in the beginning of my career, I really wanted to get good at the woodworking. I wanted to get good at carving. I wanted to get good at design. And I just looked at paint and I said, that's hard. That's going to be difficult. I'll figure out the paint thing later. So I just basically didn't worry about paint for a while. I just kind of said, I'll make guitars and I'll just oil them or something. Or, you see a lot of guys doing like milk paint finishes and stuff these days. And it's a lot of like everybody looking for a finishing solution that looks good, that feels good, that's durable, but it doesn't require the whole spray setup. And any dummy can do it because you just wipe it on with a cloth or whatever. And there are those things out there, and they're great. So maybe do that for a while and focus on making sure that your fretwork is done right, making sure that your nut is cut right, making sure that your wood carving is good. Focus, and then say, okay, I've got this stuff down. Now I can kind of start to incorporate more things into my thing. Like, I started out ambitious. The first guitar I ever designed that I ever wanted to build was going to require all the skills. Right. And I put it, it had all the binding and I had all the gloss finish, and it's just like, I just did all the things on it. I didn't start off, I think there's kind of this myth in the industry that building a Fender style guitar is the easiest way to make a guitar. And I don't think that's true. Yeah. But from the beginning, I heard that over and over. I heard people saying, yeah, like, start with like a Strat style guitar, start with a Fender style guitar. It's going to be way easier than trying to build a set neck, angled headstock Gibson style thing. But I was like, but that's not what I want to build. I want to build the set neck angled headstock thing. So I did that immediately. And that's what most of the guitars I've ever made have been. And for me, that's way easier. I still find Fender style guitars harder to make than Gibson style. So, and that's because I chose to get good at the one thing. Like, I made that decision. I had those design choices that I wanted to stick to. Yeah, no,
you definitely have to. A lot of things we're saying are of course suggesting that you are going to be helplessly pulled into this sickness called Luthery, and you're going to be making many of these instruments.
Yeah.
But for that first instrument, go shoot to the moon. My first guitar was a multi-scale 7-string, and I realized I'm going to probably have to wind the pickups on this too.
Yeah, shoot for the moon and take your time and enjoy it. Try to have some fun.
Falling down all of the rabbit holes on that one, man.
Yeah.
It's No, but it worked out well, and I still play that guitar. It works out. It plays well. It sounds cool, and it's I love it. I love it still. And you should if it ends up being that you only somehow inexplicably build one, poor thing. Make it the guitar that you want.
There you go.
Don't make it like, I guess I like building guitars. I had to build this easy one first. That's what they said to do. No, just build what you want.
It's just every single time it goes back to the ages old woodworking saying, measure twice, cut once, and have rulers, have calipers, know your measurements, and build.
Awesome. That was all great stuff, you guys. One of the books, you guys were talking about getting books. Mm-hmm. They're critical. I've learned so much from them over the last couple of years. I wish these books were out back in 1987 when I decided to try to build, first guitar. There was nothing. Okay, I just dated myself. But, so I went crazy, and over the last couple of years, I purchased probably just about every book you could purchase off of Amazon that is about guitar building, whether it be electric or steel string acoustic. And the book that I found that is the most modern, most comprehensive, and that I've learned the most from is a couple of books by Leo Lospennato, and he is a fantastic luthier based out of Germany. And so he has a couple of great books, a couple of great resources. A couple of resources in the books that he provides that are going to be downloadable. If you go to the Luthierist Facebook page right now, you're going to find a couple of downloads. The first download is going to be for a poster, or it's a PDF. You can, keep it in whatever size you want, or blow it up and print it up on 11x17 and put it in your shop or in your, your little man cave where you're building your guitars, or woman cave. So, it's an electric guitar step-by-step poster. Very, very cool. It's in a kind of a business process model step, very clean. And I think that'll be a great resource for anybody out there who's building guitars. And then the next resource that you're going to see posted on our Luthierist Facebook page right now is a template for guitar design. So this is a digital template. This is it's a blueprint. And so what you can do is you can take this document here, and it's an SVG file. So you can open that up in Adobe Illustrator, Corel Draw, and also Inkscape, which Leo has a link to. And Inkscape is a great, kind of a 2D, 3D draw program that's free. And so, anyways, we'll put this up there. You're going to be able to actually design the headstock, placement of any of the pickups and the knobs, anything, the body style. You're going to be able to do it all on this, and then take it to your local Kinko's and print it up life size, and there is your life size PDF and template. So look for that on there. I think you guys will really appreciate it. I've loved working with it so far, and I hope you guys enjoy it too.
Thanks for that, Matt. And that actually segues right into our next topic question here really, really well.
Right.
So, want to go ahead and read that?
Yeah, so let's, taking that step back from the nitty-gritty of the tooling and the build process and getting more into the sort of the holistic design, Don Hilton from Facebook suggests, for those builders making non-traditional instruments, it would be cool to hear about the inspiration and process behind the design. And, well, first of all, Paul, what's non-traditional mean?
Well, yeah, good question. I mean, I think we kind of have some general idea of that. If you just look at look at classic guitars from the 50s and from before the 50s. You've got straight frets, you've got certain dimensions that are kind of met, and that's what you got. That's traditional, I think. In the acoustic world, there's classic shapes, the Martin shapes, the Dreadnought, and that's your template. That's what every guitar is shaped like, and that's traditional. And I think that Strats, Les Pauls, and Tellys are traditional, and and that's certainly not a bad thing at all. I mean, traditional is great. I think that there's a lot of rich history and good stuff in tradition. So,
but when you're
is that good definition?
Yeah.
No idea.
Yeah, totally. But there's you talked about some in kind of non-negotiable dimensions. Going all the way back to the top of the show here, talking about neck feel and dimensions.
Oh, sure. Okay.
There's a lot of expectation with that. When a person makes their first contact, and but then as long as generally for the rest of the body of the instrument, and maybe even the headstock to a certain extent too, as long as it serves a function, as long as the body is touching your body in a comfortable way, that does not set the guitar kind of wonky or crooked on your lap or hanging funny from a strap, that's where you're able to get into some really creative areas there. And Paul, this is all very fresh in your mind, because you are designing and redesigning Danger brand models. So tell us some about that.
Yeah, well, so in terms of design, traditional versus non-traditional, I mean, there are definitely certain elements that they're as you put it, non-negotiable. I can make a guitar with 10 strings and a 40-inch scale length, and a body that's shaped like just a big frying pan, but it's going to be so massive and unwieldy. There's going to be very few players that are actually going to want to play it, if anyone at all. So I mean, you could make a 10-foot long guitar. It's just unwieldy. It doesn't make sense to make a 10-foot long guitar.
Mm-hmm.
So there's certain dimensions that just make a lot of sense that we've kind of, as a guitar culture, we've come to say, okay, 25.5 inches is a really great scale length for standard electric guitar tuning, and steel string acoustic guitar tuning. Like, we just kind of accept that, like, that's a good starting off point. And you go a little bit more or a little bit less in either direction, to achieve certain things. And so these are design considerations that you make just based off of what you're trying to get out of it. But you have these sort of starting off points. And these starting off points are developed off of just basic human genetic, physics. I mean, human beings are only so large, and you can make instruments smaller for kids, and, really, really tall dudes with long fingers are probably going to play bass. You know what I mean? Like, not necessarily, but they can or whatever, because the bass is bigger. Like, you know what I mean? Like, so there's just these things that are non-negotiable, and then everything else is kind of, to a certain degree up for design consideration. And I think another thing is that comfort thing that you mentioned, the unwieldiness, because once you say you're drawing a guitar from scratch, you're gonna say, all right, like, here's a center line. This is where the neck's gonna go on this center line somewhere. I'm going to put a nut here, and then I'm going to say, okay, here's my scale length down here, and then, okay, so that's how you place the frets right in there. And, how wide do I want it to be at the nut? Okay, there. And then how wide do I want it to be at the bridge? Okay, there. And you start figuring out all these dimensions. You draw all this stuff out, and you say, how fat do I want that neck? How thick do I want it? And you're drawing it by hand and making your cardboard template, or you're 3D modeling it, for CNC machining, whatever you're doing. You're taking all your measurements, and you determine all those things. After you've got all that stuff done, you're kind of limited on how much you can really still play with. You can say it's a double cut body, it can be a single cut body, or a body with no cutaways. You're deciding if it's an acoustic or an electric instrument. but you're limited, you know. And so a lot of the shapes that we see, a lot of the traditional guitar designs that we know and that we love came about based on the limitations of physics.
Mm-hmm.
And so when people see new guitar designs, new sort of somewhat like original guitar designs, some people scoff and they kind of say like, oh, that's not original. Nothing's original anymore. That just looks like a derivative of a Les Paul or whatever. And it's like, yeah, but you can only tweak it so much. There's just only so much that you can really mess with before it just becomes unwieldy, before it just becomes completely uncomfortable. I can make a guitar that's shaped like a massive pot leaf. I can do that, but it's not going to be, it would be stupid, because even though there's no other guitar shaped like a massive pot leaf, the closest thing you could come would be like an Explorer or a Flying V, but even that's like not,
or Bootsy Collins,
you know what I mean?
Starbase.
But like just, or Bootsy Collins Starbase. But why would you want to do that when it's just unwieldy and uncomfortable, and and it doesn't even look cool? You know what I mean? Like there's just all these reasons why it doesn't make sense. So that's why you see 100 different derivatives of a basic Strat body style. Is because you know, there's kind of only so much you can do. Like one of my favorite guitars is the Roland G707. You know what I'm talking about? That synthesizer guitar that had like the sustain bar that connected the body to the headstock.
To the headstock.
And it was all like synthesizer only, you know? I love those guitars just because it's so different and because they took such a weird risk. But it's like this thing where they're like, we have the upper horn of the guitar and we want to extend this out. But they're like, we're going to go all the way with it, man. You know, and they did. And that was so cool. You know, that was so different and weird. And it ended up being this really neat design. So there's still things that you can do, but you've just got to like, once you take all of your major design considerations, you know, into account, you're really only gonna get so far with it, and that's fine. Like there's still the focus should then be, if it's not original enough for you, well, okay, what can you do with, you know, the additional aesthetics that you're adding to it that will push it over the top? You know, is there
paint job, blingy wood,
you know, if you want to put some weird sound holes in it somewhere, if you want to use a just bizarro pickguard material that nobody's ever touched before, you know, if you want to construct the entire thing out of circuit boards, I don't know, but you know, you can do all these things. You know, there's that Jeffrey Jones, the guitar maker. I think he's kind of retired now. He does pottery mostly these days. William Jeffrey Jones did those beautiful guitars where he carved dragons and mermaids into them. You know what I mean? And and I think his body profiles are beautiful. You know, he had these original body profiles that were gorgeous, but the thing that pushed it over the top was those carvings that he did in it, you know, and that was his thing, you know. And you've got Scott Walker, who does that insane like oxidized copper top thing that's just you know, looks like it's just a shipwreck, you know, and that's fantastic, you know. And so that's really the point at which, you know, you just start to explore all the fun things that you can really do. Like where I'm at with Danger Brand right now is just sort of like focusing on the basics of the design, the simple stuff. Like let's just make some fairly straightforward guitars that just are cool and kind of traditional and classic looking. But you know, the gears are turning in my head about like, what can I do that's going to be something insane that nobody's ever done on a guitar before, you know. And that will come with time, but you know, I want to start with a solid base, and because I think that that's important. So
I think those are, you know, we can't get hung up on trying to be so damn creative and so damn original and unique that we go beyond what would be
functional.
Just functional. Right. I mean, there are very real considerations about like where the Strat button is on the midline of the guitar. You know, generally it's 12th fret or the 15th fret, and that, you know, if the rest of your instrument is, you know, reasonably dimensioned, you're gonna get some results in terms of how that hangs on your body. Where the waist is on the bass side of the instrument, that's going to determine how it kind of snuggles up to your body. Where the waist is on the treble side, that's going to play a role in whether or not or how well it rests on your knee if you're going to play it sitting down. And I ran into that problem on my first guitar. The design I drew out, and like I was just a little piece of paper. I took it to Kinko's or wherever it was and had them blow it up to full size. Made the guitar. Then once I ended up playing it, it was when I was sitting down, I realized that, like, why is my arm cranked back and sore? It was because the waist was too far up. It was too close to the neck joint, and so the bridge was too far back. And, it was fine when I stood up, but as soon as I sat down and put it on my knee, I was pulling my shoulder back to make sure that my hand was, over the bridge so I could palm mute and all that kind of stuff. Yeah. So I took that first guitar and I redesigned it. And it's what's my my Iris model now. It just feels better. And what I did was I just went online. And I just pulled up as many guitars as I could find, as many designs, whether it was Strats or LPs or PRS or just like everything in between, more of the vintage retro designs and stuff. And I just said to myself, okay, where is this waist? Where is that peak of the waist? Where does it meet the pickups? Where is it in there? And for most of the most popular designs out there, that waist is somewhere around, right between, if you've got a humbucker guitar, it's somewhere right in the middle of that. And so that means that it would be somewhere just, beyond the 24th fret, So I was like, oh, so what if I put that waist there? And I started tweaking the designs, tweaking curves and things, and I realized not only is it going to feel better when I hold this against my body and on my knee, but it kind of looks better too. It just kind of looked better. And so you've got to put stuff in, maybe put stuff in a big cardboard. If you got a big box, cut out your design in cardboard and hold it on your body.
Yep.
Or go to the hardware store and get some of that pink foam, that goes in the walls. That not the fluffy stuff, but the hardboard stuff, the closed cell foam stuff. Yeah. And cut it out of that, maybe even, and just like hold it on your body and hold it up. And if you guys know who Rick Toon is, Rick Toon does some really, I think you could probably call his stuff non-traditional. He goes for really ergonomic shapes and designs. And if you go way back in his blog and look at some of the early design stages of some of his guitars, He actually did that. He just cut out cardboard things and little shapes and put them on the knee and put them on the hip and and just held them in different positions. Looked at where the projection of the neck is, and when you look at those guitars, you're like, oh my God, what's going on here? And then you look closer and you look at somebody holding it and you're like, oh, it makes complete sense. Only the parts that are completely necessary for holding the neck and the pickups and the bridge are there, and other contact points with your picking arm, how it rests over the lower bout of the instrument. But he's removed all these other sort of superfluous kind of appendages of the instrument and just made it just what's necessary to hold the instrument together. And at first, people kind of raise an eyebrow at that, but when you really start looking at it and you start looking at the carving that he does and some of the finishes, you're like, oh my gosh, this is like organic meets industrial, just gorgeous, design. But I think that that's kind of going fairly far off in left field. But when if you go on 100 Instagram accounts, probably 99 of them are going to look very, very traditional, and that you shouldn't be apologetic about that. And I'm pretty sure that none of those builders are. Some of them just come right out and say, I believe that this design is the best design out there. It's been built a million times before. I'm carrying on a proud tradition. Other people are saying, I saw room for improvement. I tweaked this curve. I tweaked this line, and I think that's where I need to go with my work. But you've got to really love whatever it is that you come up with. You've got to look back. You got to hang it on the wall. You got to put it on the couch. You got to put it on the music stand. you gotta look yourself in the mirror. You know, you gotta
be able to live with yourself.
You gotta do the windmill pick
on it. You can't be
it
filled with guilt for the rest of your life for this awful thing that you created.
Gotta sleep at night. Gotta sleep at night.
Gotta sleep easy. All right, guys. Well, that was great. I think that we nailed those questions pretty well. I hope that people got something out of that. You know, by all means, we are here as a resource for you. So if you have further questions on any of these topics, if you need us to go into detail specifically about any of this stuff, shoot us an email. It's theluthierist@gmail.com right now. We're going to have a new email address soon, but theluthierist@gmail.com will always work. So you can keep that one in your back pocket if you want it. But shoot us an email, send us a message on Instagram, on Facebook. You know, we're on all the things. You can tweet at us, at the Luthierist, all over the place.
And don't forget the survey. We're really already just mining the data that we've got there. We're really happy to find out who's listening to us and what your interests are. Yeah.
Yep. Absolutely. I mean, support the show, obviously. You know, we want you to be a patron of the show. But we are here for you. That is really the point, you know. So we're here to answer your questions. We're here to talk to the people that you want to hear from. And we're going to be bringing you lots and lots more of that. Anything else to add, gentlemen?
No, I think that wraps it up. How about you, Matt?
I think that's really good. You both did fantastic. I think everybody's going to get a lot out of this podcast. Really quick, just want to remind everybody, get over to the Luthierist page on Facebook. Check out a lot of links to resources that you're going to be able to tie back to the conversations and the topics that we discussed tonight. And again, send those emails in, ask those questions, and we're really loving the surveys. We're going to really be able to bring you guys what you need. Those are so important. So thanks again. And that's all from me, guys.
All right. Thanks for listening to the Luthierist Podcast. Okay, bye.